The twin sons of Perseus, 9 burned low on the horizon, painting the sky in bands of deep crimson and violet. Captain Rick Donovan stood atop a makeshift command platform, binoculars raised to the distant ridgeline. The dust storm had settled hours ago, but the air still carried the scent of scorched rock and fuel. Behind him, rows of armored vehicles stood in formation. Modernized M1A3 Abrams tanks, their battle-worn exteriors gleaming under the alien twilight. A low whistle sounded beside him. "Hell of a view," muttered Sergeant Alex Gunny Mathis, his scarred hands resting on the barrel of his rifle. "Pity we won't get to enjoy it long." Donovan lowered the binoculars and turned to his second-in-command. "That eager to start a fight, Gunny?" Mathis chuckled, shifting the toothpick between his teeth. "Just saying, sir. These aliens think they got us beat before the first shot's fired. Makes it all the more satisfying when they realize how wrong they are." The Velker Dominion had arrived 3 days ago, descending in sleek, obsidian ships that hovered impossibly still above the human colony. Their emissaries, tall, slender beings clad in segmented armor, stepped forward, all regal poise and condescension. The negotiations had lasted all of an hour before Donovan realized the truth. The Velker weren't here to talk. They were here to demand surrender. They'd called human weapons primitive, their reliance on physical projectiles outdated. Plasma, they said, was the weapon of an enlightened species. Tanks, they laughed, were relics from a bygone era, obsolete in the face of grav tanks and energy shields. Donovan had kept his mouth shut through most of it, letting the Velker general boast, letting them believe what they wanted. But when they issued their ultimatum, kneel or burn, he simply met their gaze and said, "Come and take it." Now, on the eve of battle, that promise was about to be tested. A sharp crackle sounded in his earpiece. "Captain, movement on the East Ridge," came the voice of Lieutenant Ben Carter, his lead engineer. Multiple grav vehicles moving fast. Donovan snapped the binoculars back up. Across the rocky expanse, a formation of Velker hovercraft approached in a loose V pattern, their engines emitting a dull, warbling hum. They glided over the terrain as if weightless, shields shimmering faintly in the dying light. "Here we go," muttered Corporal Jake Boomer Wallace from the gunnery pit of the nearest Abrams. His fingers danced over the controls of the tank's main cannon, anticipation thick in his voice. The first shot came from the Velker, an arcing lance of blue plasma that slammed into the cliffside just ahead of the human encampment. The ground erupted in a shower of molten stone, forcing several soldiers to dive for cover. "Return fire." Donovan barked. The Abrams tanks roared to life. Boomer's turrets swung into position, and a split second later, the deafening crack of a 120mm smoothbore cannon split the air. The shell hurtled forward, striking the lead Velker vehicle dead center. For a moment, the shot seemed to have no effect. Then the shield flickered, buckled, and the hovercraft detonated in a fiery explosion. The wreckage tumbled to the ground, its sleek frame reduced to twisted slag. The radio came alive with a chorus of cheers. "Did you see that?" Boomer hooped. "Drop them like a bad habit." But the Velker weren't deterred. Their remaining forces advanced, plasma turrets spitting rapid volleys of blue fire. The Abrams tanks responded in kind, their cannons thundering, sending shell after shell into the approaching enemy. Some rounds bounced harmlessly off the energy barriers, but others struck true, finding weak points in the Velker shielding. Donovan stayed fixed on the battle, calling orders, adjusting formations. It was a brutal exchange, high-tech energy weapons against tried-and-true kinetic firepower. And for the first time, he saw something unexpected in the Velker formation. Hesitation. They'd come expecting an easy victory. Instead, they were losing vehicles, soldiers, and whatever smug confidence they'd carried into this fight. "Sir." Carter's voice cut through the comms. "They're adjusting tactics, falling back, repositioning. They're trying to funnel us into a crossfire." Donovan made a split-second decision. All units, tighten formation. Mathis, take second platoon and flank their left. Boomer, keep pressure on their right. We're not playing their game. With a guttural growl, Mathis yanked the controls of his tank and surged forward. Roger that. Let's remind these bastards what armor can do. The battle raged on, the ground trembling under the force of repeated artillery strikes. Velker vehicles exploded in cascading bursts of blue flame, while human tanks, though battered and scorched, pressed forward with relentless determination. Then, just as the tide seemed to turn, the Velker unleashed their trump card. A new shape emerged over the horizon, a towering war machine, twice the height of the Abrams, bristling with weaponry. Unlike the hovercraft, this monstrosity moved on massive mechanical legs, each step sending shockwaves through the ground. "Ah, hell," muttered Boomer. "They brought a damn walker." The war walker raised its primary weapon, a crackling energy lance the size of a small building. It fired. The beam carved through the battlefield, slicing one of the lead Abrams in half. The explosion rocked the entire formation, sending debris raining down. The radio filled with shouts and static. Donovan clenched his jaw. The Velker were done toying with them. "All units, fall back to defensive positions," he ordered. "Regroup at the ridge now." As the tanks pulled back, kicking up dust and fire, Donovan knew one thing with absolute certainty. This fight was far from over. The retreat had been brutal but necessary. The war walker's energy lance had turned the battlefield into a smoldering wasteland of twisted metal and charred earth. In the frantic pullback to the ridge, the survivors had managed to salvage what they could for damaged but functional Abrams tanks, 3 mechanized infantry transports, and barely 60 men left in fighting shape. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Captain Rick Donovan stood atop a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley below. The Velker forces had ceased pursuit, regrouping on the far end of the battlefield. The war walker stood motionless at their center, its four massive legs anchored into the ground like an ancient titan waiting for the final blow. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They thought the fight was already over. Donovan exhaled, his breath visible in the cold night air. "They're giving us time," he muttered. "Time for what?" Sergeant Alex Gunny Mathis asked, rubbing at the bandage around his forearm. "To make peace with God." "No," Lieutenant Ben Carter said, stepping up beside them. His eyes had the gleam of a man who had spent the last few hours thinking through the impossible. "Time to figure out how to kill them." Carter was the unit's lead engineer, a sharp-eyed, quick-talking scientist turned soldier. He had spent the last 4 hours poring over Velker wreckage, salvaging every scrap of enemy tech the crew could get their hands on. He now held a charred but mostly intact fragment of one of their hovercraft's outer plating. Donovan crossed his arms. "Tell me you've got something, Lieutenant." Carter knelt, pulling a combat knife from his belt, and rapped it against the alien alloy. It gave a dull, hollow clang. Velker armor is light, designed for maneuverability. Their vehicles are covered in an energy-based shielding system, but it's tuned to counteract energy-based weapons. High-speed plasma, electromagnetic bursts, that's what their shields are designed to neutralize. Mathis frowned. "So what? We don't have plasma weapons. All we've got is good old-fashioned kinetic." "Exactly," Carter interrupted. "They think our tech is too primitive to be a real threat. But here's the thing, they never designed their shields to block raw, high-velocity metal. That's why Boomer's first shot punched through that hovercraft." Donovan nodded, understanding now. "So you're saying our shells are actually more effective than energy weapons?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Carter said. "We don't need to match their technology. We need to exploit its weaknesses." Mathis snorted. "You're telling me that an empire that flies through space and burns planets can't handle a goddamn tank round?" Carter grinned. "Ironic, huh?" A new energy rippled through the survivors. The mood had been grim ever since the retreat, but now there was something else. A spark of possibility. Donovan turned to his men, raising his voice. All right, listen up. We're not done yet. We've got 4 Abrams left, and as long as we've got shells in the breech, we can still fight. Carter just gave us the key. We focus on what we do best. Hard, fast, accurate shots. We hit them where they don't expect it, and we keep moving. Captain, Boomer called from the gunner's seat of his tank. We've got another problem, though. That big bastard. We can take out their grunts, but what the hell do we do about the walker? A silence fell over the group. The war walker was something else entirely, plated in thick armor, with a shield system far more advanced than the hovercrafts. They had watched its energy lance carve through their lead tank, like butter. Carter rubbed the back of his neck. I've been thinking about that. The shields work by dispersing energy over a wide surface area. That's why the smaller hovercrafts drop after a couple of well-placed hits. But that walker? Its system is stronger. So we need to break the shield, Donovan said. Carter nodded. We need to overwhelm it, hit with something that carries enough force that it just shatters. Mathis narrowed his eyes. Like what? Carter hesitated for just a second, then said, like a sabot round. Fired at 3 times its normal speed. Boomer let out a low whistle. You're talking about a railgun. We don't have a damn railgun, Lieutenant. Not yet, Carter admitted. But we can make one. That got their attention. Carter gestured toward the half-burnt wreckage of a Velker power core, which had been dragged back to their makeshift base for study. The Velker use miniature fusion reactors in their hovercrafts. We hook one up to an Abrams, modify the gun barrel, reinforce the firing mechanism, and we might just be able to get a rail assist on one of our rounds. Not a true railgun, but enough acceleration to punch through that walker's armor. Mathis raised an eyebrow. And by might, you mean? Carter sighed. I mean, it'll probably blow the tank apart when we fire it. But if it works, that walker goes down in one shot. Donovan looked at the ruined battlefield below. The Velker were still holding position, watching, waiting. They didn't see humans as a threat anymore. They thought this war was won. That was their first mistake. He turned back to Carter. How long to rig it up? Carter cracked his knuckles. If I don't sleep, 5-6 hours. Donovan clapped a hand on his shoulder. Then get to work. The hours passed in a blur of frantic engineering, welding torches flashing in the dark. Carter and his men stripped power cores from every Velker wreck they could find, splicing wires, jerry-rigging a system that had no right to exist. By dawn, they had something close to a working prototype. Carter wiped grease from his forehead as he stepped back, admiring his Frankenstein creation. The modified Abrams now sported a reinforced gun barrel, braced with scavenged alien alloys. Cables ran along its length, connecting to the gutted Velker reactor strapped to the tank's rear. It looked like something out of a nightmare, barely held together with spit and determination. Mathis walked up, arms crossed. That thing gonna kill us before it kills them. Carter smirked. We'll find out soon enough. Donovan climbed onto the tank, patting the turret. All right, boys. Time to remind these bastards why Earth still builds tanks. As if on cue, movement stirred in the Velker camp. Their forces began mobilizing, hovercrafts rising, the war walker's massive legs shifting. They're coming, Boomer said over the radio. Donovan strapped himself in. Good. The Abrams rumbled to life, the makeshift railgun crackling with stored energy. They had one shot, and that was all they needed. The ground trembled as the Velker forces advanced, their hovercrafts gliding effortlessly over the charred battlefield, plasma cannons humming with lethal energy. At their center, the war walker loomed like a metal colossus, its 4 mechanical legs carving deep trenches into the dirt with every step. The energy lance at its core began charging again, its blue glow intensifying, ready to carve through anything in its path. Captain Rick Donovan stood atop the modified Abrams, his grip tightening on the turret hatch as he surveyed the battlefield. The wind carried the acrid scent of scorched metal and fuel, mixing with the static hum of their makeshift railgun. This was it. The Velker had given them time to prepare, and now they were coming to finish the job. Inside the tank, Lieutenant Ben Carter hunched over the improvised power system, fingers flying across a jury-rigged control panel. Sparks danced in a confined space, cables running from the scavenged Velker reactor to the main gun. Every inch of the tank had been reinforced, welded, or rewired in a desperate attempt to make this single shot count. Sergeant Alex Gunny Mathis leaned against the hull, shotgun in hand. "So, just to be clear," he muttered, chewing the end of an unlit cigar, "we're betting our lives on an experimental rail-assisted sabot round that might blow us sky-high before it even touches the enemy?" Carter didn't look up. "Yep." Mathis exhaled. "Hell, I've had worse bets." Donovan smirked and keyed his radio. "Boomer, you ready?" Corporal Jake Boomer Wallace, stationed in a secondary Abrams, responded with a chuckle. "Ready to put another notch on the barrel, sir. Just give the word." The Velker opened fire. Plasma bolts screamed across the battlefield, exploding in fiery bursts against the rocky terrain. Donovan's men had positioned their remaining tanks within natural cover, jagged cliffs and trenches shielding them from direct hits. But the War Walker was a different beast. It fired not in bursts, but in precision strikes. A single bolt of its energy lance blasted through the wreckage of a downed transport, turning metal and earth into molten slag. Donovan didn't flinch. "Hold fire. Let them come closer." The Velker continued their advance, unaware of the trap they were walking into. Carter had spent the last few hours recalibrating their armor-piercing sabot rounds, adjusting them for the new acceleration system. If his calculations were right, this shot wouldn't just pierce the Walker's shields, it would rip straight through its core. If he was wrong, they wouldn't get another chance. The War Walker stopped, its primary weapon angled downward, targeting the Abrams with terrifying precision. The glow at its center flared bright, a swirling storm of plasma coalescing at the tip of its cannon. "Now!" Donovan roared. Boomer's tank fired first. The round hit the War Walker's shields at an angle, sending ripples of energy coursing through its defensive barrier. The shield flickered but held. A second shot followed from another tank. This one struck lower, near the Walker's joint. The shield crackled, struggling to maintain cohesion. That was their opening. "Firing rail round." Carter shouted. He slammed the trigger. The modified Abrams shuddered violently as the rail-assisted sabot round ignited. A thunderous crack split the air as the projectile left the barrel at blistering speed, the sheer force of the shot sending a shockwave rippling through the ground. The round glowed white-hot, a streak of death cutting through the battlefield. It struck the War Walker dead center. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the Velker's shield collapsed in on itself, shattering like glass. The sabot round tore through the Walker's armored plating, ripping deep into its core. A muffled explosion echoed from within, followed by a violent chain reaction as the Velker reactor destabilized. The Walker let out a metallic groan, its legs buckling. Then, with an ear-splitting roar, it detonated from the inside out, a massive fireball consuming its frame. Burning debris rained down as the once mighty war machine collapsed into a heap of molten wreckage. Silence fell over the battlefield. Then, a deafening cheer erupted over the comms. "Holy hell, we did it!" Boomer hooped. "That ugly bastard's down." Mathis let out a low whistle. "Remind me to buy you a drink, Carter, if we live through this." Carter, shaking from the adrenaline, let out a breathless laugh. "Told you it'd work." But Donovan wasn't celebrating yet. His eyes remained locked on the remaining Velker forces. Their entire advance had hinged on the War Walker leading the charge. Now, with their mechanical titan reduced to burning wreckage, they hesitated. Hovercrafts wavered midair, pilots uncertain whether to advance or retreat. That was the moment Donovan had been waiting for. "All units," he ordered, voice like steel. "Advance. Show them why they should fear us." The Abrams tanks roared forward, treads grinding against scorched earth. Plasma fire still rained down, but the Velker no longer fought with confidence. Their arrogance had been shattered alongside their war machine. Boomer lined up another shot, sending a sabot round through the cockpit of a hovering Velker gunship. It spiraled out of control before crashing into the valley floor. Another tank opened fire, shredding a retreating infantry unit. The Velker tried to reorganize, but the fear was setting in now. For the first time, they weren't fighting against an inferior force. They were fighting something they didn't understand. Humans weren't supposed to win this fight. And yet, here they were pushing forward, refusing to die, refusing to break. Donovan watched as the Velker lines began to crumble. They were running. The mighty warriors of the Dominion, who had laughed at human technology, who had deemed this battle won before it even began, were now fleeing like frightened animals. A slow smile spread across Donovan's face. "That's right," he muttered. "Run." He keyed his radio again. "No mercy. We drive them out, every last one of them." The tanks pressed onward, pushing deeper into the enemy lines. The Velker had come to Perseus, 9 expecting to crush a primitive species. Instead, they had awoken something far worse. And by the time the battle was over, the galaxy would know one thing for certain. Earth was not to be underestimated. The last of the Velker hovercrafts vanished beyond the horizon, leaving behind only the dead and the dying. The battlefield, once a proving ground for the so-called superior technology of the Dominion, now lay littered with the wreckage of their failure. Fires burned among the twisted remains of their war machines, thick black smoke curling into the sky like funeral pyres. The smell of ozone and scorched metal filled the air, mixing with the acrid stench of blood. Captain Rick Donovan stood atop his battered Abrams, hands resting on his hips, as he surveyed the aftermath. His men had done the impossible. They had shattered the Velker advance, broken their will to fight, and turned their arrogance into fear. But the cost had been steep. Bodies of American soldiers lay scattered among the ruins, their uniforms torn, their weapons still clutched in lifeless hands. Even in victory, war demanded its price. A voice crackled through the comms. "Perseus Command, this is Task Force Echo. We've driven the enemy out of the sector. Awaiting further orders." Donovan exhaled, pressing a finger to his earpiece. "Copy that, Echo. Maintain defensive positions. We hold this ground until reinforcements arrive." He climbed down from the tank, boots crunching over shattered alien armor. Nearby, Sergeant Alex Gunny, Mathis, sat on a half-buried Velker corpse, rubbing dirt from a fresh cut on his cheek. His shotgun rested across his lap, smoke still curling from its barrel. He gave Donovan a tired smirk. "Not bad for a bunch of primitives, huh, Cap?" Donovan chuckled. "Yeah, I'd say we held our own." Lieutenant Ben Carter approached, wiping grease and blood from his hands. The engineer looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but there was something else too, satisfaction. He clapped a hand on the hull of the modified Abrams, the makeshift railgun still crackling with residual energy. "Never thought I'd live to see a tank fire a rail-assisted sabot round," Carter muttered. "Hell, I wasn't sure it'd even work." "It worked," Donovan said. "And now they know." Carter glanced at the battlefield. "You think they'll come back?" "They always do," Mathis grunted, lighting what remained of his cigar. "But next time, they won't be so cocky about it." A low rumble shook the ground, and for a moment, every surviving soldier tensed. Then, from the distance, the familiar thumping of American gunships filled the air. Reinforcements. A squadron of H-99 Raptors roared overhead, their missile pods bristling, their pilots taking in the battlefield below. Beyond them, a column of armored transports and fresh tanks rolled in, their treads kicking up dust as they moved to secure the area. The cavalry had arrived. A radio operator jogged over, breathless. "Sir, General McAllister wants a sitrep. Says he's been getting conflicting reports about how in the hell we held out." Donovan smirked. "Tell him we fought like hell. And tell him to bring more tanks next time." The radio operator nodded and ran off. Mathis stretched with a groan, wincing as he stood. So what now? Now? Donovan glanced at his men, exhausted, battered, but unbroken. Then he looked back at the horizon, where the Velker had fled, their pride shattered. Now we take the fight to them. The Abrams tanks rolled forward once more, engines growling, barrels raised toward stars. The war wasn't over, but Earth had sent its message, and the galaxy would never forget it.